welcome to this live post in which I discuss Matthew's Gospel. We're looking today at chapter 16 of Matthew's Gospel. So I'm just going to pull it up very quickly here, maybe on Bible Hub. And let me open it to Matthew. Chapter 16. So we're more than halfway through Matthew's Gospel. When I'm done with Matthew's Gospel, I'll follow your suggestions if you have some on what you're interested in. Maybe we go to the book of Genesis in the Bible, because that's very important for understanding, like not only the parallel with the Quran, story of creation and all of that, but also to understand the Christian story of redemption and what is said to be the fall of Adam, and the stories of the patriarchs in general. So that's one thought. But I'm open to suggestions, and it doesn't necessarily have to be commentary on the Bible. We can go many different routes with this. So let me know your thoughts. All right. So I go to the Berean Standard Bible. Okay, BSB. All right. Okay. So Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. I'll check your comments from time to time to make sure everything is okay, because I'm sure you will alert me if something is not right with the audio or video. And then I will look at your comments and try to answer your questions in more detail later on after I read through the chapter. So we're chapter 16 and reading from the Berean Standard Bible, which is found easily on BibleHub.com. So this is what we have. First, the demand for a sign. Then the Pharisees and Sadducees came and tested Jesus by asking him to show them a sign from heaven. But he replied, "When evening comes, you say the weather will be fair, for the sky is red. And in the morning, today, it will be stormy, for the sky is red and overcast. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but not the signs of the times. A wicked and adulterous generation demands a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of Jonah." Then he left them and went away. Now, it's important to pause here and think about the sign of Jonah. Elsewhere in Matthew's Gospel, in chapter 12, verse number 40, the sign of Jonah was further specified by saying, for us Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish, so too shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the earth. Now, what is mentioned here, however, is very brief, truncated, and scholars believe that this is roughly equivalent to what is found in the Q Gospel that both Matthew and Luke relied on as their source. And in the Q Gospel, it doesn't say anything about 3 days and 3 nights. It just says, except the sign of Jonah. And now scholars have had to think about what exactly was the sign of Jonah. What does it all mean? That Jonah was there in the belly of the whale, and then he came out alive. So this would have been, according to some scholars, what the sign intended. And the scholar Dieter Zeller, for example, a German scholar, was cited by Daniel Smith in his book, The Postmortem Vindication of Jesus and the Sayings Gospel Q, as saying, that is, that Dieter Zeller said that Jesus must have been taken up alive. Daniel Smith's view is that, it refers to a view among some early Christians that Jesus might have been translated from the tomb into heaven, and perhaps this is after death, but Dieter Zeller thought that this was while Jesus was still alive. So that's a very interesting discussion, and it's interesting to see this truncated version, which is, it might have been the original version, or at least it's an earlier version than the version in Matthew, which says that, there's this about 3 days and 3 nights. It wasn't so much the time factor, it is the the state in which Jonah was. Okay, so the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. We come to verse number 5 now. When they crossed to the other side, the disciples forgot to take bread. Watch out, Jesus told them. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Leaven meaning the yeast, something like this. They discussed among themselves and concluded it is because we did not bring any bread. Aware of their conversation, Jesus said, "You of little faith, why are you debating among yourselves about having no bread? Do you still not understand? Do you not remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many basketfuls you gathered? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many basketfuls you gathered? How do you not understand that I was not telling you about bread, but beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees?" Then they understood that he was not telling them to beware of the leaven used in bread, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Now, you see, this is all drama that is, written after the fact. It's hard to imagine that somebody like remembered the story exactly the way it was, like blow for blow. This is how the conversation went between Jesus and his disciples. It's more likely that the story is put in a dramatical form later on, and then that dramatical form is what is represented in the gospel here. Otherwise, of course, they would have remembered, and it's hard to imagine that they are so lacking in the, intelligence as to be unable to grasp, Jesus is saying, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees, and they're thinking, wait a minute, it's because we didn't bring any bread, So this is after they have just fed so many people with a few loaves, and again, another occasion, so many people with a few loaves. You would think by now they're expecting, okay, we don't have to bring any bread because Jesus is going to, multiply whatever bread is available. The people might bring their own bread, and Jesus might multiply it and feed the thousands. So, as I said, this is drama created after the fact. I'll just take a quick look before we go to verse number 13. I'll take a quick look at the chat to see if there are any indications that I need to do anything different. I see the chat is active with questions, so I'll pay attention to your questions later on and try to answer them. And I see that Sister Wahida Wahid happens to be the only person who has shared the stream, and her name means only. So Sister Wahida, thank you for doing that. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and reward you and all of the people around you. Okay, so I'll go back to the reading, finish this chapter, and then I'll pay attention to your comments. Actually, it's not a long chapter, so we'll have more time for your questions and comments today. Okay, we go to verse number 13 now. Peter's confession of Christ. So this is a very important place in the gospel, because this is where we see that the identity of Jesus is being discussed and declared. Verse number 13, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he questioned his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" Jesus asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but my Father who in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he admonished the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Christ. Okay, so let's pay attention to a few details here. First of all, the mention of the Son of Man. Jesus is obviously referring to himself as the Son of Man here, but we've already pointed out that there are instances where he spoke of the Son of Man as one to come after him. So another individual, and it's likely, I believe, that could be a reference to the Prophet Muhammad, on whom be peace, who is known to be the son of man, in that he's a human being. Okay, verse number 14, they replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. Now, that means that to the onlookers, Jesus appears like a human being. I mean, he for all that anyone could see, he is a human being. So yes, he's a special human being. He's preaching with authority. He's doing miraculous things. So that means he's like one of the prophets. So something he's one of the prophets, somehow like reincarnated here, like John the Baptist, for example. Everybody knows by this time that John the Baptist had been beheaded. And yet they're thinking that Jesus must be that John the Baptist, and that would mean that Jesus was not, declared so publicly, as the Gospels show, by John the Baptist to be the Son, like the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, as we see in John chapter 1. And even the baptism scene in the Synoptic Gospels, of which Matthew is one, that scene too is called into question, because if everybody knew that this is John the Baptist and this is Jesus, John the Baptist is baptizing Jesus, and the sky opens and the voice of God calls out, "This is my beloved Son, you should listen to him," and so on. So everybody knows, there's a whole crowd of people, they know the difference between John the Baptist and Jesus. So when John the Baptist is publicly beheaded, or maybe not publicly beheaded, but you would think that that too is public knowledge. Like people would be asking, where is John the Baptist? John the Baptist has followers. So people would be asking, where is John the Baptist? And, it'll become news that John the Baptist had been beheaded. So why would they think that Jesus is John the Baptist? Like, it doesn't make any sense. What makes sense is that the whole drama that is presented in the Gospels, showing that Jesus was declared publicly by John the Baptist to be the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, that is not quite correct. That drama perhaps did not unfold like that. This is the later story about Jesus, and the whole thing that Jesus, was pronounced by God Himself in the public arena to be the Son of God. This, too, is a later dramatization. So Jesus then turns to his disciples. Well, what about you? This is verse number 15. Who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter answered in verse number 16, you are the Christ, Son of the living God. Now, this title, Son of the living God, here is only in Matthew's Gospel. And commentators freely admit that this is just from Matthew himself. This is not the original story. By comparison, we can see in the Gospels of Mark and Luke, the same story is there, but there the title Son of the Living God is absent in this declaration from Peter. So it is clear to Christian scholars that Matthew has added this himself. And notice how the whole thing concludes in verse number 20. Then he, that is Jesus, admonished the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Christ. So that means that that's the conclusion. That means that Peter must have declared you are the Christ, and now Jesus, for reasons which are quite obscure, is now saying to Peter, okay, don't tell anyone that I'm the Christ. So you guys know it, and that's enough. So if it was that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God, then Jesus should have been saying, but don't tell anyone I'm Son of the living God. It can be that he's saying to them, okay, yeah, tell them I'm Son of the living God, but don't tell them I'm Christ. That would not make much sense. So that means that the original pronouncement was that you are the Christ, not that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Okay. Verse number 17, that Jesus declares that he will build his church on Peter. Peter will be the rock on which he built his church. Now, this becomes a puzzle for our Christian friends, because if Peter was the rock on which Jesus built his church, how could it be that a teacher comes on the scene, namely Paul, and in Paul's writings, he is saying that he called Peter a hypocrite to his face. So Paul is obviously at loggerheads with Peter, and Paul is denouncing Peter, at least for the occasion. And later on, there is a narrative which says that he received the right hand of fellowship from Peter. That probably was, written to assuage the situation, but many scholars recognize that there was a tension between Peter on the one hand, Paul on the other hand. So Peter can be expected to know the original and true teachings of Jesus, and Paul, being an outsider, a latecomer, perhaps what he taught was not in line with what Peter was teaching, and therefore not in line with what Jesus was teaching. And God knows best, but I'll leave it at that. And the idea that Jesus gave them the keys of the kingdom of heaven, so that whatever they bind in heaven on earth will be bound in heaven, this seems to be quite a stretch. And some church authorities have taken that to heart, and they think that they can go forgive sins and whatever. In fact, the forgiveness of sins, this is probably mentioned in the Gospel according to John, but I don't remember so clearly now. In any case, that becomes a continuing tradition of people confessing their sins, and the church authorities forgiving them, because they feel that they have that authority to bind in heaven, in earth, and it will be bound in heaven as well. And whatever they loose on earth, that will be loosed in heaven as well. So if they release a person from his sins on earth, they grant absolution, that will be the situation in heaven as well. It's quite a qualification, quite a you might say a privilege that is given here to whoever might bear it. And then we go to verse number 20. We finished 20. Now we go to verse number 21. And we're almost at the end of the chapter here, and then I'll take your questions and comments. So, verse number 21, from that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, and scribes, and he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. Now, if Jesus had said this in such clear language, you would expect that after, like he's saying, look, all of these things are going to happen. I'm going to Jerusalem. I'm going to suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes. I will be killed, and on the third day I will be raised to life. Now, when he goes and he is suffering and he is killed, the next thing to expect is that he will be raised to life. But the gospel stories do not show that the disciples had any expectation that Jesus was going to be raised to life. In fact, everyone is taken by surprise. They don't know what to do. They forsake him and fled when he's arrested, and so on. And the women disciples are coming to anoint his body on the Sunday morning, and that's when they discover the tomb to be empty. It looks like nobody had an idea that he's going to be raised to life. The only persons who had such an idea, it would seem, would be the Pharisees, the Jewish leaders at the time. It is said in Matthew's Gospel, later on we'll come to that, they went to Pilate to plead with him and say, seal up the tomb, otherwise his disciples may steal his body and then say to everybody that he's been raised back to life. So it's not so much that they expect that he will be raised to life, but they expect that there's going to be some deception, and that, Jesus is not going to be raised to life. He's dead, and he'll remain dead. And so, if at all he died. So this idea that Jesus actually said that on the third day he will be raised to life, this seems to be a later addition after Christians had already concluded that he was raised to life on the third day, and now they're reading backwards to say, okay, well, he must have predicted it before it happened. So now, verse number 22, Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Far be it from you, Lord, he said, that this shall never happen to you. But Jesus turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. And so we find that just a few verses later, after Peter had already been declared to be the church on the rock on which Jesus will build his church, and whom against whom the gates of Hades cannot prevail, and now Peter is being called Satan. So what is happening here is not entirely clear. Some commentators will say, well, Peter had the wrong understanding of what is meant by Messiah, and he thought that the Messiah could not suffer, and he didn't want Jesus to suffer, and Jesus pronounced him to be a kind of a Satan who is a stumbling block to him, because Jesus has to resolutely go forward to his suffering, and here we have somebody telling him, no, it shouldn't be like that. So later on, Peter, even in this gospel, is shown to be one who is not so very faithful. He denies that he knows Jesus, and so on. So you see this kind of tension that is going on in the early church that is reflected in the gospels here. On the one hand, Peter is known to have been declared by Jesus as the rock on whom Jesus will build his church. On the other hand, the church was built largely on the foundations of teachings of Paul, and so the tensions are going back and forth. There is an attempt to represent Peter as the leader, and on the other hand, there's an attempt to denigrate Peter, and we see this all side by side in the same chapter. Okay, and now we come to the final couple of verses, few verses, under the title, Take Up Your Cross. This is Jesus is saying to take up your cross. Starting with verse number 24, then Jesus told his disciples, if anyone wants to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. What will it profit a man if he gains the whole world but forfeits his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? For the soul of man will come in his Father's glory with his angels. For the Son of Man will come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will repay each one according to what he has done. Truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Okay, so now we have a futuristic saying about the Son of Man. Who is the Son of Man? Because Jesus is not saying, I, the Son of Man. He's speaking about the Son of Man as though this is another person other than Jesus. And this person is supposed to come before those who are standing there all die out. And that would mean within one generation. And obviously that did not happen. And that led to a great disappointment. And, of course, the refashioning of the statements where they could be refashioned to give it a different meaning. But this one is clear that some who are standing there should still remain alive by the time the Son of Man comes. What is this thing about denying themselves and taking the cross to follow Jesus? So obviously the cross represents great suffering, and Jesus is saying, okay, so you have to suffer. But then if the idea is that Jesus suffered once and for all of his followers, why would his followers have to bear their crosses as well? Jesus bore the cross on behalf of the followers, didn't he? So there is some difficulty in appreciating this part of the story, and we have said a lot of good things during our commentary on Matthew's Gospel in particular, especially when we spoke about the Sermon on the Mount. We saw a lot of similarity with the Muslim preaching, but this particular chapter we have found a lot of difficulties with it. And that will not always be the case. In a lot of cases, what is taught in the Gospels are what Muslims teach as well. So we believe in all of the books that God has revealed. We believe in the Torah, the Gospel, the Psalms, and we believe in the Quran. And of course, the Quran is the final arbiter in all matters. So I will leave it at this then, and I will go take your questions and comments. That's the end of chapter 16. Only 28 chapters in this gospel, so soon we'll be done with this, and then I'll follow your suggestions on what you're interested in. Perhaps we'll go discuss the book of Genesis. So let me first take a look at your comments, and I'll rearrange my desktop here. Okay. So, first of all, let me see who has shared the screen. who has shared the post. And I see that Abu Bakr Samaila has done that. Thank you, Brother Abu Bakr. And so too, Brother Johnny Najib. Thank you, Brother Johnny. And Brother Mikhail White. Thank you for that. And Sister Ludi Acosta. Thank you for that. And of course, Sister Wahida Wahid, who did it in the first place. So thank you all for sharing. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala use this post as a way of bringing more people to a proper understanding of his faith. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us all and use us as instruments for the guidance of others. Okay, so I'll take a look at your comments now and try to answer them where questions are to the best that I can. Okay, salam from a brother whose name is written in Amharic or something. Sorry, I couldn't read it, but his name is Muhammad Doshirovic, which he has kindly written for me in English letters. Thank you for that, Muhammad. So you're saying salam, wa alaikum salam. Why do Christians shun away from accepting Matthew 5:17 as a proof that they must keep the laws of Torah? Jazakallah khairan. So, Brother Muhammad, part of the problem is that they have followed a teaching that says that Jesus canceled the law. So they're thinking we don't have to follow the law. So when they come to this verse, they are reinterpreting it. But this verse is very clear. It's Matthew's emphasis on following the law. Did Jesus himself say the words exactly in this manner? This can be disputed. The New Jerome Biblical Commentary on this verse says that this is Matthew's overemphasis. So Matthew must have represented a trend in the early church where some people are denying the law and some are emphasizing the law like to the nth degree. So Matthew is on this, emphasizing the law. Of course, in Islam, we have struck a balance here by saying that Jesus did abrogate some of the law, but some of it he did uphold. And so, yes, we can't imagine that some of the law has just been done away with. So what do you think about the Ten Commandments? Certainly you have to keep the Ten Commandments, right? So most Christians will recognize that. But so the whole idea that the law has been abolished is not a correct idea. And it is up to Muslims to bring that message back to our Christian friends. Okay, and Wahida, Sister Wahida saying Assalamu alaikum, wa alaikum assalam. And Sister Ludi, I said Sister Ludi, and I can't be sure about the gender, but please forgive me if I misjudge from the name. Brother or sister, I thank you for being here and for asking this question. Okay, the question is, if Allah has mercy and loving, why does he allow people to suffer from this cruel world? Well, my friend in faith, this could be for many different reasons. This is all in the wisdom of God. This is a lecture by itself about what is called theodicy, or the problem of evil, and this confronts all of the religions. But we can say here are a few things. One is that there are certain natural things unfolding that causes suffering for people, and God is allowing those for better reasons. They could be reasons that we do not fully comprehend. One of the things that was discussed after the great tsunami in our lifetime that killed many, many thousands was that geologists started to say that, look, we sympathize with people and their suffering, but at the same time, from a scientific point of view, we have to point out that tsunamis do have a benefit in that the earthquakes in general, they bring up a fertile soil from below, and that allows vegetation to grow in the future. So we need this because after a while the earth becomes infertile, and the surface land, that is, and due to this churning that occurs during an earthquake or tsunami, we have new soil coming up to the fore, and that is fertile, and so people can eventually live. So this tsunami or earthquake causes death on the one hand, but it also produces the elements which are necessary for life. So that's just one way of answering that. There are many other things that we can say, but you can see that we're not totally devoid of an answer here. And Omar Nizam saying, question one, I would like to know what book or books you are reading of late. Oh, so right now I started reading a book called Whose Trinity, Which Monotheism? Or Which Trinity, Whose Monotheism by Thomas McCall. That's one. And at any time, Brother Omar Nizam, I'm reading more books than one. There is an interesting book that I picked up recently. It is a concordance of the Quran. It is in 3 languages, English, Arabic, and Urdu. And it's a kind of a topical arrangement. So you can look up things by topic, and we can see all the verses of the Quran that deal with a particular topic. Of course, the verses are sometimes given without full context, and if you want to know more, you go to that context. I'm also reading a book called Open Theism by Clark Pinnock and some other authors. Okay, so Brother Hamza, Sheikh, how are you, Sheikh? And Alhamdulillah, I'm doing fine, Brother Hamza. I pray that you're doing well as well. And Brother Hamza is saying, Sheikh, just an update. We're still waiting for the brother to reply to the email I sent. When he does so, I will forward it to you. Thank you so much, Brother Hamza. Brother Hamza is helping me with some research. I appreciate that. Okay, Brother Omar Nizam. I think I just did that question, so I move on. Oh yeah, question 2 from Brother Omar Nizam. You once mentioned How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie as one of your favorite books. I found it to be overly reliant on a pacifist worldview. Do you find it to be the same? I never thought of it from that angle. Yeah, now that you mention it, yes. This is a kind of a non-confrontational approach in life. If a police stops you to give you a ticket, you don't argue with the police. You just blame yourself and make it so very clear that you regret that and it's not going to happen again, and then hopefully he doesn't give you a ticket. So it's a kind of a yes, you're right. Now that I think of it, that's a good observation. May Allah bless you for that. I don't know if I would want to still change my view on the book in general. I still think it's a good book and many useful points. Maybe that's why I've become so pacifist after maybe this book has had its influence on me. Okay, Hamza, Sheikh, can you tell us about the Ikhwan al-Muslimin and their teachings? So my brother Hamza, I don't know that much about them, but I know that recently they have fallen into disrepute by some on the part of some Muslim governments, because the Muslim governments do not want anyone to be preaching a message that could threaten the legitimacy of their rule. And one thing that is known about the Ikhwan al-Muslimin is their emphasis on a just and correct political system, which many Muslims would identify with, and then some Muslims will stop short as to whether we can use violent means to overthrow the current government, and of course when it becomes necessary, if other peaceful means are not working, but maybe the Ikhwan al-Muslimin has a slightly different view on that, but it would be slight, because most Muslims would recognize the need for peace and justice and so on. So I don't know much beyond that. Other than that, they're basically mainstream Muslims. I mean, they're reading the same commentaries, the same books. They're following basically the same teachings as other Muslims. So it's really the salient characteristic maybe of this particular group is, or at least what has brought them into disrepute with the Muslim governments, is that particular political angle that the Muslim governments may feel threatened by. Of course, if they're good and just and fair governments, they should have no reason to worry. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us all. Okay. Hamza is saying, Sheikh, has the works of the Egyptian reformers been translated into English, and are there any works that you advise to read? Well, Sayyid Qutb was one of those, and his tafsir of the Quran has been translated. Some say don't call it a tafsir because it doesn't follow the methodology of the traditional tafsirs, but nonetheless, it's a reasonable commentary on the Quran. And Sayyid Qutb is one of those who was, in trouble with his government because of his particular political views. Um, but this translation is available and very nicely translated. Yeah. Other than that, there are some works here and there which are based on the works of Muhammad Abdu and Rashid Rida and some others. And most recently, Sheikh Dr. Yusuf Al-Qaradawi was following a similar line of thought, and many of his books have been translated into English, so you might want to look at those. Okay, Hamza Sheikh, how do we respond to the accusation that the Egyptian reformers, whose line of thinking we follow, were secret agents and Freemasons? I think that's far-fetched, really, brother Hamza. Okay, Hamza, I know that's not coming from you. You're saying other people are saying that. So people might be saying that only to turn away public opinion from, these persons who were good Muslims and who were good expositors of the Quran and the way of life of the Prophet, peace be upon him. I don't necessarily agree with that political view that they champion, but nonetheless, to say that they're secret agents or Freemasons, this is ludicrous. Okay, Hamza asking, Sheikh, what's the ruling on releasing wind during wudu? And do we have to repeat it? Well, this is what the tradition has, and I don't see any difficulty following that tradition. As for the reasoning behind it, it could be that, maybe now people may feel differently about it, but when the tradition was set, people would have felt that, farting is something like it's kind of gross and it is something that let me start from a different angle. So when we do wudu, what's happening? We're preparing our minds. The mind comes into a sort of refreshed state as we refresh our bodies by moistening certain portions, washing and so on. We not only feel clean, but we feel refreshed physically. And the mind also feels somewhat refreshed. I mean, psychologically, what happens to the body is also affecting the mind. So the mind feels refreshed, and you feel, after you've gone through this whole ritual, you feel that you're in a state of readiness to go and talk to God. So now farting, in the meantime, this somehow affects the minds of people, where they think, okay, well, wait a minute, I'm not in that good state of, like, I'm not really so red, like I just done something foul here. And therefore, the right thing to do will be to go back and to wash all over again. And now we're in that state of preparedness again. So it's a mental state. It's not so much that the wind is a problem. It's just, not from a physical point of view, but it is the effect that it has on the mind of the worshipper. So this is how it has been set in our tradition, maybe because of the way people viewed farting at that time, even if they don't view it like that now. But still, some people might view it like that now. And I'm not excluding myself from that. So that might explain why this particular rule is there in our traditions, and I don't see any difficulty with retaining that rule. Omar Nizam, question 3: why do the details of the nativity story change so much from Matthew to Luke to the Quran? What is really going on here, and what here that we should have 3 vastly different birth narratives? Okay, so Brother Omar Nizam, before we get to the Quran, why is Matthew and Luke so different from each other? So Matthew, Mark, and Luke, basically follow the same outline of stories. You can see blow by blow from the baptism onwards. But before the baptism, Matthew and Luke are in 2 different directions, and so too they follow the same outline throughout until they get to Mark chapter 16, and then after Mark chapter 16, verse number 8, where you can see the correspondence with Matthew and Luke, very closely following again blow by blow, line for line, verse by verse. And then so the first 8 chapters of the first 8 verses of Mark chapter 16 are precisely mirrored in Luke and Matthew, with only some minor changes that you can detect in Matthew and Luke. But then after the content of verse number 8 in Mark's Gospel, where Mark says that the women fled from the tomb and said nothing to anyone because they were afraid, we see this verse reflected with changes in Matthew and Luke. But after this verse, Matthew and Luke basically go their own way. So far, they were very close to each other because they were close to Mark. So this is what scholars have found, that when Mark is in view, Matthew and Luke are both following Mark, and so they are close to Mark. But when Mark is not in view, that means before the baptism, because that's not in Mark, and then after the women fled from the tomb, because that's no longer in Mark, then Matthew and Luke are going their own way. So Matthew and Luke basically have two different birth stories, because there might have been many birth stories at the time, and including what is now in the apocryphal Gospels, but some of those birth stories got recorded in Matthew and Luke, and that was preserved as part of the biblical canon. Now, why is the Quran different? Well, the Quran has its own objectives. The Quran is calling people towards Tawheed, towards monotheism, and it is using the stories that are already known in the environment in which the Quran is being preached. So some of those stories are now in the apocryphal Gospels. That doesn't mean that they're not true, and it doesn't mean that they're true either. What's happening is that the Quran is just using the stories that are known to people, whether from the canonical Gospels or the non-canonical Gospels, and drawing their attention to certain points which would lead to the conclusion that the Quran is true. This is the book of God. Jesus is a servant and messenger, a Messiah of God. Great as he was, he's not God. So that's the Quranic vantage point. The Quran does not give a particularly privileged position to the Gospels as Christians have them in their hands and in their Bibles. The Quran is drawing on what was known more generally, even from the Gospels, which are now deemed by Christians to be, and even at the time might have been deemed by many Christians in the Arabian environment as being of apocryphal origin. So the Quran has its own viewpoint and its own way of doing things. It has its own argumentative strategy, which is called rhetoric. It is doing things for many different reasons, some of which is now difficult for us to go behind and get to the bottom of. Like, why does the Quran do it this way? So we can't know the mind of God in it. We can only see some reasons. So sometimes the Quran could be drawing from the apocryphal sources just to put our Christian friends on the spot and say, well, why do you think this is not the valid story? Like, tell us. So it's drawing them into disputation with the Prophet, peace be upon him, so that the Prophet could correct them and teach them the right knowledge that God has now sent the Prophet as a messenger from himself, from God, to bring them to the truth that they have neglected for so long. Okay, question 4 from Omar Nizam. I'm not sure if you are familiar with the MCU, Marvel Cinematic Universe, but do you feel that the 4 canonical Gospels and the apocryphal Gospels and the Quranic stories are all like an ancient version of rebooted film series? Well, it's interesting that you put it that way. To a certain extent, this is what is happening. I don't know so much about MCU, but yeah, to a certain extent, this is what is happening. Stories are told and retold by various writers for their own purposes, and they take the angle that they find is beneficial to their cause and that they find to be correct. And the Quran comes on the scene and says, okay, well, wait, you've told these stories and retold the stories. What happened in history is not so much the point. The point is, what do we make of these stories? Like, what significance are these stories going to have for us? And what are the teachings and the moral lessons that will come out of these stories? So that's the point that the Quran is driving home, and this is how the Quran is using the story. So the Quran is retelling the story in its own way and saying, this is how the story ought to be told, and when you tell it this way, these are the moral lessons that emerge from it. Okay, Hamza, Sheikh, how do we reconcile principle A with principle B? Principle A says having even an atom of Iman will get you to heaven. Principle B says a Muslim must absolutely 100% trust his belief in the religion. Well, first of all, I will I will pause at principle B here. I don't know if this 100% thing is really what is demanded of us by God. The Quran says, for example, الَّذِينَ يَظُنُّونَ أَنَّهُمْ مُلَاقُو رَبِّهِمْ, those who think that they are going to meet their Lord, and so on. So sometimes the Quran uses this word dhan, those who hope for, yarjun, they are hoping, and so on. Uh, so yes, there are other times when the Quran says, the believers are only this who do not doubt, but they strive in the way of God with their wealth and their property and so on. So you have that, but we can't say as principle B. I doesn't seem to me that we can say that, well, it's demanded of us absolutely that we must have 100% trust. No, human beings are as we are, and God created us. He knows how we are. It's hard to have 100% trust. People may say that, and that's nice in a declaration, but people waver. Some of the prophets of God are shown to have wavered on some occasion in the Quran. And what about the rest of us? So there is no conflict there. There is the principle A that even if you have an atom weight of Iman, that will get you into heaven. But we should counterbalance that by saying that, when somebody says, a doctor says to you, look, use this medicine, you will be cured. But then the person goes and the person drinks alcohol, and the alcohol is contrary to the medicine. It might have a counteracting effect. So the person will not be cured. So they can't blame the doctor. The doctor gave them good medicine with good advice on how to take it, but they took wrong substances. So it's like taking medicine, but also taking poison. Of course, the poison is going to kill you even before the disease that you were trying to cure with the medicine. So somebody says, take this medicine, you will be cured, and then you go out and you take poison in addition to the medicine. Then you're asking, well, why wasn't I cured? Of course, you'll be asking in the life hereafter because the poison will have killed you before you could ask the question. So the point is that there are medicines and there are also antidotes, or there are anti-medicine or things which are contrary or poisons. So when we are promised, okay, do this and you will get paradise. Okay, if you have an atom's weight of faith, you will enter paradise. But then on the other hand, there could be other things, sins and so on, which will drag you down and cause you to be in hell for a long time before you actually get to paradise and so on. So we have to always weigh these opposites. But I wouldn't put principle B as the opposite of principle A, because I have a question about principle B, the way you have stated it. Okay, Omar Nizam, question 5. Most Western critical historical scholars accept that Jesus was crucified on the cross, but then how do you expect his post-crucifixion appearances, if he was in fact crucified or killed on the cross, given that they do not like supernatural explanations? Okay, so first of all, Brother Omar Nizam, the Western scholars are not going to take these reports as valid. These reports that show that Jesus, after the crucifixion event, was there eating and drinking with his disciples and so on. No. And the most they will allow is that the disciples were somewhat like hallucinating. They thought that they were seeing Jesus, but that was all in their own minds. They had a real experience of Jesus being with them, but that was still all in their own minds. It's real for them, but there is no reality on the scene. Some may say, for example, if you had a video camera, you went there and did a taping, you wouldn't find Jesus in the footage. So it's all in the minds of the believers. So that's how they would do that. From a Muslim point of view, the way I reconcile this whole thing is to rely somewhat on Raymond Brown, who said that the various reports of the appearances of Jesus to his disciples all stemmed from a single report initially, and the initial report was only that Jesus appeared to his disciples in general, and that this report was of a spiritual type of appearance in which Jesus did not really say anything. So they saw him, they were convinced that they saw him, and they went about emboldened to go and preach his message. Now, from a Muslim point of view, it's fine to think that God gave the disciples a vision of Jesus to comfort them and to reassure them and to embolden them to go and preach the message. And but that does not mean that Jesus actually died on the cross. Jesus could have been taken down alive from the cross and translated into heaven, perhaps from the tomb, and that's why his tomb was found empty. And then God allowed the disciples to see a vision of Jesus that would give them the kind of assurances that I've already spoken about. So that, to me, reconciles the whole thing. Okay, and moving on. Brother Imran Nizam with a sixth question. If we could pick one gospel that agrees the most with the Quranic version of Jesus, which one would it be? Well, it's hard to pick one, Brother Nizam, Omar Nizam, because, some agree with us in some things, some in some other things. I think they're all useful, but we have to have a critical eye. Mark's gospel is of great value because it's recognized widely to be the earliest of the four, and that is probably closer in many respects to a representation of Jesus as he was before the other gospels came to revise the story. But that doesn't mean that Mark captured everything. For example, the story of the virginal conception, that is there in Matthew and Luke, so that's good to read Matthew and Luke. Matthew and Luke also relied on the Q gospel for many of the sayings of Jesus, some which are lacking in Mark's gospel, and Muslims will be very interested in the sayings of Jesus, especially those which are found in the Sermon on the Mount, which we have covered previously in our discussions of Matthew chapter 5, 6, 7. So look back for that in case you missed it. And John's gospel is useful as well in its own way. It has many interesting statements. The most interesting for Muslims is the prediction that after Jesus will come the Paraclete, and Muslims interpret that Paraclete to be a reference to the coming of our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, despite John chapter 14, verse 26, which clearly says the Paraclete, the Holy Spirit. But as C.K. Barrett has pointed out in his commentary on John's Gospel, the term the Holy Spirit at that place could have been a later insertion, and God knows best. Okay, Arawaya saying wrong answer. Thank you, Arawaya, even though, of course, we're not in agreement, but thank you for being here and for engaging in the comments. Okay, Omar Nizam, question 7. Once we, inshallah, establish colonies on the moon and Mars, will we need to find a new localized Qibla on the moon and Mars respectively? Yes, definitely. So probably what they will do is that they will say, okay, let's face in the direction towards Earth in general, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. And that direction could be shifting. I'm not so very well schooled in astronomy, but I'm sure the astronomers will guide us, inshallah. And I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will protect us all, whether here or on the moon or on Mars. I don't know if Mars is inhabitable, but we'll see. But you're asking theoretically, and I think that's the way. Okay, I've hazarded an answer. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept and forgive us for our errors. Okay, Brother Omar Nizam, question 8. This isn't actually a question. I highly recommend Dale Carnegie's 1948 book, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. I found it excellent for coping with stress. Thank you for that. I read it too many years ago, though I don't remember the contents now. But yeah, that's interesting. Okay, and Brother Ibrahim Namaru saying, Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. May Allah increase your knowledge and bless you. Please, where the where were the synoptic gospels written? So synoptic gospels, the exact place cannot be known now, Brother Ibrahim, but traditionally Christian scholars have said that Matthew was written at Antioch, Mark at Rome, Luke at Caesarea, and John at Ephesus. Now, modern scholars may have slightly different theories about that, and I haven't followed that up very well, but it's hard to know, basically. Okay, Noor Bayan Moha, mashallah, and thank you for being here, Sister Noor Bayan. And Omar Nizam with one last question, question 9, and I think I'll end after that. So let me see. Question 9. Isn't it silly of the Western critical scholars to say that they were all mass hallucinating instead of taking the easier answer, which is that in fact he was not crucified or killed on the cross? Okay, so I don't want to blame the Western critical scholars here, because they're using their methods, and based on their methods, this is what they can come up with. They can say that there's no reason for Christians to invent the idea that Jesus was on the cross, because this was an embarrassment for them, and so they just accepted what everybody saw, that Jesus was on the cross. But where where the critical scholars will stop is by at anything which seems to be supernatural. So they will say we cannot accept the reports that Jesus reappeared to his disciples, at least in a physical manner. We can accept that they had this hallucination or they saw a vision, but that was all in their own minds. There was no reality outside of them. So, of course, they too might even add that we're not even denying that Jesus was a true vision, that Jesus actually existed as a spirit, or that Jesus is still alive today. They just say, given our historical critical methods, we have no way of verifying that. So we're talking about what's verifiable. And from their point of view, the fact that all of the Christians are saying that Jesus was crucified, at least the Christians who composed the New Testament, and other indications as well, it looks like even the Gnostic Gospels that are giving a different version, they're not denying the very basic scene that there is a person there on the cross that everybody thinks is Jesus. They're trying to explain it from a different point of view to try and say that this ultimately Jesus did not suffer, but that's in harmony with their particular viewpoint and their theology. So when the historians minus the theological additions and layers, they come to what they think to be the core, that Jesus was on the cross, and it's just that people didn't like it. And so they found ways of dealing with that. The Christians, that he resurrected from the dead; the Gnostics, who were also Christians, that he only appeared to be there on the cross, but he wasn't actually, and so on. So, yeah, I wouldn't blame the historians, but I think that I have a way of interpreting the Quran that is in harmony with many of the facts which are known from the New Testament, and that is suitable for our presentation in dialogue. That Jesus was put on the cross, but not actually killed on the cross. He was taken down alive, put in a tomb, and from the tomb he was translated into heaven, and that explains why the tomb was found empty. And then God allowed the disciples to see a vision of Jesus, which is a kind of spiritual vision, and that it gave them the assurance that they needed to continue the faith. So Noor Bayan saying, can you comment remainder on the claim of the dual personality of Jesus? Okay, so you know what, Sister Noor Bayan, we will be debating this very issue between myself, Reverend Samuel Green from Australia, Rudolf Bushoff from South Africa, and our brother Yusuf Ismail as well. This is coming up in a couple of weeks, actually, on November 13th and 20th. We'll have two debates basically on these sorts of questions. But just very quickly, the Christians are saying that Jesus was God, and then when we point out, but he was also human, we will say he's clearly human, and they will say yes, he was both God and man, and they must have had two aspects to him, a divine aspect and a human aspect. And we say, well, would that not mean that you have two individuals? Because they would have to have two minds, a divine mind and a human mind, and the human mind could not be thinking I'm divine, because a human mind who thinks he's divine really is a crazy person, and the divine could not think I'm not divine, because he would have to know that he is divine. You have to know I'm God. So you find two different minds here that really cannot be the one and the same mind. And to have one person, you have to have one mind. And yet the Christian declaration is that Jesus was a single person, undivided, having the two aspects, sharing the two natures, having the divine nature and also the human nature. We think that this is an irresolvable contradiction, but some of our Christian friends will defend this as a valid way of thinking. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide them, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us to what is best. Be on the watch out for the debate coming up. The details of the event will be posted here soon on my Facebook page, and I look forward to seeing you all then on those occasions. In the meantime, I'll have another khutbah coming up on Friday. Join me for that, and I'll have my usual post on comparative religion next Sunday around noon, inshallah, usually 12:30 p.m. I'll let you know if I want to change the time. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all of you who have shared the stream, and I'll look again and see if there are some others who shared it recently. Sister Noor Bayan, shared it, and Brother Mustafa, Muhammad Mustafa, has shared it as well, in addition to those whom I've already mentioned. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for commenting. Thank you for sharing this stream. Thank you for expressing your likes and so on. And thank you for your du'as. And of course, help us to continue with this good mission to spread the word of Allah around the nations. And you can do so by going to our website, islaminfo.com, islaminfo.com, and click on the donate button. Send us a donation to help us to carry this message forward. Thank you all for being here. May Allah protect you all from COVID-19, from every other sickness, disease, stress, and distress. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you every bit of happiness in this life and forever in the life hereafter. Peace and the mercy and blessings of Allah be with you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.